I was 17 when she came. I'd been living with my abusive mother for 17 long, painful years. It was around midnight, and my mother was already asleep. So when the 3 soft raps at the front door came, it was me who answered. An odd-looking little girl stood there with cheeks pale and colorless, blonde hair and braided pigtails, pink dress torn a little at the hem, feet bare and turning slightly blue from the cold winter, and black eyes. Fathomless, deep black eyes. I quickly let her in, thinking of how horridly undressed she was. It wasn't until later I'd wondered why she'd not been shivering, or questioned as to why she was here in the first place. I got her into the living room, wrapping her little form in a thick afghan my grandmother knitted. She held it, though it didn't seem to affect her, but I smiled. "What's your name, sweetie?" A long silence passed, in which she stared at me. I was beginning to be discomforted by her black gaze when she parted her lips and spoke in a soft voice. "Lacey Morgan." I nodded, smiling again. "You can stay here tonight, Lacey." Motioning to the couch, she curled up in a little ball, black eyes still on me, and I exited the room. That night, I slept soundly, not worrying about my mother beating me or the strange little girl on my couch. When morning came and I trudged into the kitchen, I was greeted with a coffee mug to the shoulder. I gave a feeble shout of pain, staring at my mother. "What the hell did you do? Why is there dirt on the couch?" she shouted, confusing me greatly. Upon investigation, I found that Lacey had vanished, the only proof she'd been there being some dirt that must have fallen off of her dress or feet. I took responsibility, earning myself a strong hit to the cheek, then left for school. While there, I heard something that sent chills through my spine. "Lacey Morgan was found dead last night." I passed the day waiting for any more news on the subject, but found none. Upon arriving home, the news was broadcasting a live report on her though. "Lacey Morgan, 6 years of age, was reported dead at 7 last night. Her body was located in the backyard, buried there in her pink dress. So far, there has been no sign of her mother, Marissa Morgan, who is suspected to be the killer. Marissa has reportedly abused Lacey multiple times and may be responsible for her death." Suddenly, a picture of Lacey appeared on the screen. She appeared very close to how she had when I met her. Blonde hair and braids, pink dress, pale face. Only her cheeks had color, and her eyes were baby blue. To most this would seem unimportant, but to me it was. She died before arriving at my house. If what the newscaster said was true, died hours before. I tried to play it off, going about my business. I went to bed early, so as to not see my mother. It was around midnight when I awoke to cool fingers stroking the bruise on my cheek. I sighed, leaning into the small hand. "Never again," Lacey whispered before her hand vanished. Not 10 minutes later, I heard my mother screaming. I rushed into her bedroom, nearly fainting at what I saw. My mom was thrashing wildly in her bed, a small creature having buried its face into her chest. I could hear the sound of flesh tearing and my mother's screaming increased in volume. I wished I hadn't gotten up. Later on, I tell myself I hadn't, but I had. So when Lacey pulled back from the gaping hole in my mother's chest cavity, I had a plain view of her razor-sharp teeth glinting in the light, glinting with my mother's blood. She smiled innocently at me for a moment, before swiftly tearing out my mother's jugular. That time, I did faint. When I came to, I was in my bed. I walked to my mom's room, morbid curiosity getting the best of me. Upon opening the door, I found the room empty. The bed made neatly, as if my mom had left for work early. The only oddities were the dirt child's footprints and the open window, showing that Lacey had in fact visited. I never saw my mother again, and I never missed her either. I eventually got married, and we had a child together. I named her Lacey. Recently, I noticed the neighbor's daughter has all sorts of scrapes and bruises on her arms. I started watching their home. The other day, I saw something odd. a little girl running barefoot through their backyard up to their back door. It was around midnight, so I couldn't be for sure, but I thought she met my eyes with her black ones, and I could swear she mouthed 2 words at me. Never again. Near my house, there's a dense forest, and in the middle of that forest, a cell phone tower stands tall among the trees, rising higher than any other structure. Now, a cell phone tower is nothing extraordinary in 2015, but the legend that surrounds ours is unsettling at best. Because of the tower's location within the forest, it is rather inaccessible to most people. Even those who service the thing have a hard time getting to it with all their equipment. Nevertheless, it has been effectively dubbed the Tower of Death by our town. The tower was state-of-the-art for when it was built, and replaced an older tower, which was smaller and nearing the end of its life cycle. As the legend goes, just 2 days after the tower was built, a young couple who obviously were under the influence climbed to the top of the tower in hopes of taking a picture of the sunset as it descended over the town. As they reached the antenna cluster at the top, the girl was suddenly snagged on a cable and lost her footing, causing her to fall to the ground. She was killed upon impact. The male, devastated, also flung himself off. But instead of dying instantly like his lover, he survived just long enough to drown in his own blood. They died in agony and panic, never having even said their last words. Ever since, the tower refused to operate normally and would sometimes inexplicably cut out when the sun is setting, people have reported hearing faint sounds that resembled screams when calling on their phones, and would even get texts from unknown numbers with the words "help" and "please help us." The various carriers which the tower served were soon notified of the strange occurrences, and went to investigate. When they opened the transceiver at the base of the antenna, they hastily replaced a lot of servers, switches, and other equipment that controlled the tower. One of the technicians claimed that they had found droplets of fresh blood on the electronics, which were sealed inside a solid steel enclosure that was completely watertight. This all happened well after the death of the couple, and the structure and surrounding area was well cleaned from top to bottom long ago. Many assumed that maybe an animal had been killed near the antenna, or the technician was making this whole thing up for attention. But others suspected something a bit more disturbing. Despite the best efforts of the ISP, the tower would not operate reliably. I personally never believed in any of that, but what happened yesterday made me become a bit more open-minded about the whole thing. I was taking a walk, enjoying the beautiful sunset one last time before winter sets in, when I looked up at the supposed Tower of Death, and that was when I saw the silhouette of a person, barely visible, hanging from one of the horizontal bars on the antenna cluster. The person was clearly struggling, and his or her grip was failing. I watched in horror as the person fell from the structure, probably hundreds of feet to the ground. Panicking, I called 911 and ran toward the tower, but deep down, knowing that whoever it was probably long dead. It took me almost half an hour to arrive at the base of the enormous structure, and when I arrived, the entire scene was spotless. There was no body to be found, no blood, no evidence that anyone has been there in ages. The emergency services arrived just minutes later, and all they found was me, frozen in shock. I tried to explain to them what I saw, but they likely thought I was either drunk or crazy, or probably both. They walked around the tower once, found nothing, and left. That night I was beginning to relax, and assumed that it was probably just an optical illusion of some kind, when I received a text from an unknown number. All it said was one word: help. Dearest Matthew, they're coming. I can hear the creak of a hinge that has seen better days in every moment that goes void of sound. I can see their menacing shadows creep towards me from around the corner, hugging tightly to the wall to avoid detection. Some days I could swear I can even smell them. They're coming. I thought I could get away with it. I didn't start out in the lab thinking it would change my life. It was just a job that paid $1 an hour more than my desk job writing biology textbooks for some high school senior who was going to use it as a makeshift pillow in class. Maybe I would find some purpose with beady eyes staring down some chunky off-white microscopes. At any rate, after a month or so of red tape, orientation meetings, and the like, I was told the next day I would finally get hands-on. I showed up to work and was rushed into HR. Here it goes again, I thought. Another policy video to watch. But I was wrong. 2 men in suits sat in a room desolate of anything other than a simple plain desk and 3 chairs. I sat down. I was given one choice to make: sign a gag order or be put out of the job. And I wasn't about to go back to faking enthusiasm while making simple diagrams of cell division. I guess I feel I'm on borrowed time, or perhaps even I am teetering on the edge of a scale of my own fate. Am I not being chased? Perhaps that hangs in the balance still. I won't tempt that by going into too much detail now. All I can say is you asked about rare plants, and I have not only seen the most obscure, but I've created it. However, there is nothing cool about this plant. That is, if it were to be referred to as being of the plant kingdom. Though I wouldn't say it falls squarely in the animal either. They said we were experimenting with advanced grafting. We started out doing just that. We pushed the boundaries of the host through various forms of radiation. We were able to graft avocado stems onto bamboo shoots. I know it shouldn't work, but it did. But this wasn't enough. We pushed further. We then set out to have the new grafted plant reproduce. Through millions of years of evolution, animals have been able to incorporate in their DNA what used to be individual beings, organs. So too, we set out to have the bamboo create a seed that would also incorporate the DNA of the avocado graft. It wasn't for 10 years and over 100,000 forced mutations through radiation treatment that it happened. We celebrated. We would go down in history, a far cry from my days of writing of other biologists' contributions in the field. Champagne bottle in my hand, my boss called me into his office. I walked in, and before me was a simple table with 3 chairs and 2 men with suits. Another gag order. No one was to learn of this, but the promise of new exciting research made me swallow my pride and accept to carry on. That was until we began the Yucca Transproc project. As I type this now, I tremble to think of what we did. But it has to be known. It has to be destroyed. I didn't think it would work. It shouldn't work. The plant kingdom and the animal kingdom are just that. 2 different things, not to be mixed. And to do it with humans? Had we no dignity? I really must hurry now. They're coming. I stare at the dilapidated well in front of me, the moss growing over the side of it, and the fallen bricks were strangely beautiful. The light shone through the densely packed trees and onto the well with a form of grace that only came with the wild beauty that lived simply in this little meadow. With its waist-high, soft flowing grass, with the ring of pine trees that circled it perfectly, as though the trees had been carved into a circle around the well. The well was simply magnificent. While it was falling apart, it had an ageless beauty to it. There were wildflowers growing up around it, weaving between the densely packed bricks and hanging above the abyss that was the middle of the well. The bricks laying on the ground were bleached bone white from the sun, the edges crumbling away, leaving the corners broken, showing the harsh, whittled down cement on the inside. Small caves dug into the cement where the rain had pooled over the years and eaten away at the rock. There was a form of wooden fixture over the well, simply two wooden poles stuck up with one balanced on top of them, nailed down by two large, over-the-top rusted nails. Wound around the exact middle of the pole was a rotting, swollen rope, the edges of the rope frayed and broken. The rope ended less than a foot from the pole, the end looking as though it was cut, rather than if it had broken on its own per due time. Unable to help myself, I step forward. The beauty of it all is too much for me. I'm so drawn to it. My hands itch for my drawing pad and charcoal pens, and I mentally curse myself for forgetting them. Just this once, at home. I make a silent mental note to remind myself to come back here sometime and draw this beautiful scene. I keep making my way forward, finally reaching the edge of the wall. Yet, as I stare down it, I can't help the overcoming feeling of dread that fell over me as I grabbed the edge and leaned forward, looking down into the bottom of the well. I feel a strange sense of relief when I see nothing, but I realize that some parts of the darkness are thicker, blacker than others. I suck in my lower lip and begin chewing on it, a nervous habit I developed in 2nd grade and have still yet to give up. My eyes slowly adjust to the darkness, and I can't help but to childishly squeeze my eyes shut, terrified of what I might possibly see in there. After a minute, I give up and push out a breath and open my eyes, blinking once. I scan the bottom of the well for a moment, scanning the still black water, the dirt flakes floating in it, fallen from when my hand rubbed against the top. The dirt turned into mud and then sank into the bottom of the well, breaking apart as it floated down. After a moment, I realize that certain patches of the darkness are thicker than others, and I choke on my own breath, leaning further down, bending halfway into the well, my eyes straining in the darkness to see whatever it is. I suddenly have the feeling of being stared at from behind. I straighten up immediately, nearly hitting my head on the wooden bar, and spin around, scanning the meadow, which is empty outside of myself. I shake my head, mentally laughing at how silly I was, and turn back around to search the water again, the curiosity eating a hole through me once again. But the moment I turn around, I stop dead. There was no one in front of me, because there was someone behind me. He stands nearly twice as tall as me, which isn't too hard, seeing as I'm on the small side. With dripping wet, dark brown hair, shocking blue eyes, and a cruel smirk curving up the lips of his nearly perfect, full lips. I stare at him for a moment, feeling unsettled. I look at him, squinting, before I realize why. His face, which once looked perfect, outworldly maybe, was actually littered with small cuts. The right half of his face drenched in blood. The top part of his left ear was clipped off and bleeding, dripping watery blood into his ear, making me scrunch my nose. His exposed collarbone was cut through on the right side, the cut starting at the base of the neck, running across his collarbone and into the depth of his shirt. I let out a startled gasp and stumbled backwards, suddenly terrified of this man. Rather than overcome with the need to help him, his smirk turns into a full maniacal smile, and he begins making his way towards me. Turning to come around the edge of the well, I turn and begin running, stumbling over the broken rocks and bricks that seemed beautiful before, now only seeming ominous, something that's been getting in the way of me in my escape from the dripping wet harmed man. Glad that I was on the track team for once in my life. Behind me I hear him catching up, and I let out a small scream of terror as I push myself faster, getting closer to the edge of the meadow, feeling as though if I left the meadow he'd leave me alone. He'd leave. I turn my head back to look at him, shuffling when I realize that he's not there. I look back ahead of me and skid to a stop right before I nearly run into him. He goes to grab me and I duck down, skittering around him and making for the exit again. This time, I exit the meadow safely, breathing out a sigh of relief. I turn to look at him, then stop. He's standing 5 feet from the edge of the meadow, glaring at me with his hate-filled eyes. He drags out his feet along with the dirt, twitches, but is seemingly unable to move from the spot. I back up, slowly moving away, and then I turn and run. Having enough of this, I run up the hill and fall down before I wandered into the horrid meadow. I rush down the street to the home in which was my original destination, and I run and run until I can't run anymore, and then I keep running. I keep running until I burst into my front door, run up the stairs and into my room, and collapse on my bed, covered in grass stains, shreds of grass and mud, yet not caring at all. I black out, trying to wash the memory of the past hours from my mind.